United States of America politics. From the time of William McKinley of 1897 to 2016. Lecture 1. American Politics at the Dawn of the 20th Century. America was becoming more a place for immigrants such as Ireland, Italia, Poland, etc., coming to places such as Boston and New York. Many of these immigrants were poor, uneducated Catholics, like my family, usually plugged into local democratic machines. Therefore, point number 1, America was becoming more diverse on many different levels. The United States at this time was becoming more urbanized and industrialized. Second, indeed, the late 19th century was a time of rapid industrialization and increased urbanization, a movement from farm to factory, Americans moving from rural areas to large suburban cities, or Europeans moving into urban American cities. American cities at this time were growing tremendously. And third, the South was becoming more solidly democratic as the federal government retreated from protecting black voting rights in the region following the 1870s. During the period of Reconstruction after the Civil War, Congress was extremely intentional in enforcing the 14th and 15th Amendments from the 1860s to 1870s, but by the middle of the 1870s to 1880s, this protection of civil rights had crumbled and was pretty much non-existent. The old Confederate had returned. Southern Democrats, Civil War Confederates who imposed a Jim Crow system of discrimination against blacks, instituting poll taxes, literacy tests, and an all-white primary, including fear, violence, and intimidation. Fourthly, Northern elites were becoming more interested in political reform via civil service reform, a desire to ensure that the best of men were serving, a belief that an American life would increasingly become more complex, and as the federal government expanded, that those who serve in government needed to be qualified. Particularly, these reformers were referred to as mugwumps, wanted competitive examinations. Not at the presidential cabinet level, for those who staff over the departments of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. Do these people have solid credentials? The mugwumps wanted these ambassadors of the Treasury, State and Justice Departments, etc., to be experts in their field, not merely political hacks, political appointees placed via their power or their affiliations, etc. Fifthly, at the dawn of the 20th century, the Democratic Party was divided between Bourbons and Reformers. Bourbons, not the whiskey, were conservative Democrats, or, for example, President Grover Cleveland, who served 2 non-consecutive terms as president from 1885 to 1890, 1885 to 1889, and 1893 to 1897. They promoted states' rights, sound money, or the gold standard at the time, and frugality in spending on a federal level. They opposed prohibition and the redistribution of wealth, and most of these Bourbons came from eastern United States, Grover Cleveland himself being a former New York governor. Reformers, or insurgents as they were called, were mostly radical Westerners and Southerners who advocated government action in the economy, especially the free and unlimited coinage of silver. The late 19th century was a time of deflation, particularly in the farming industry of the economy, meaning that farmers' commodities went down in price. Inflation is not good, but deflation also has drastic results as well. These reformers called on government to help farmers. William Jennings Bryan was their leader, who lost the Democratic nominee as president in the year 1896, and he was a significant figure for the Democratic Party for years to come, well deep into the 20th century, and he also was, in a sense, a forerunner to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. Bryan had been a United States congressman from Nebraska in the middle of the 1890s. He was an evangelical Christian, and in 1896 he delivered the keynote address at the Democratic Convention. During this time, primary contests did not exist yet. The actual selecting of the nominee was done at the convention. And so many would go to these conventions having no clue who the nominee would be, but knowing that it was either them or someone else in their delegation. Bryan was a fantastic orator and speechwriter. His speech that day was titled "The Cross of Gold," in which he argued against corporations, the gold standard. The dollar was backed by gold at that point in time, before the silver certificate. He also wanted the dollar to be backed by silver, so as to create inflation in order to help farmers. He declared in his speech, quote, "We have behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world. We will answer the business demand of the gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor with a crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." End quote. And indeed, he used religious imagery to make his point for his audience to understand. His speech galvanized the convention, and he won the nomination that week at the convention for the presidency. His nomination represented a Silverado, a reformer takeover over the Democratic Party. At the age of 36, he was the youngest presidential candidate in American history and a liberal champion of the common man. He believed that the Democratic Party should stand as a resistance against well-born zealots, as he put it, who wanted to stop immigration and increase the federal powers of the government in order to enrich themselves and their friends. He spoke out against what would later be termed trickle-down economics. He said, quote, "There are those who believe that if you will only legislate to make the well-to-do prosperous, their prosperity will lead to the prosperity of those below. The Democratic idea, however, has been that if you legislate to make the masses prosperous, their prosperity will find its way up to every class that rests upon them." End quote. He was the first presidential candidate to openly campaign for office. Indeed, at the time, presidents before were known to not campaign for office. It was seen in the society and culture at the time to not be appropriate at the time. He traveled over 18,000 miles that year, visiting 26 states, 250 cities, and addressing over 5 million people. Prior to 1896, it was not fashionable for a presidential candidate to openly campaign for office. It was considered vulgar to be above the parameters of your current office, or in other words, asking people to vote for you. If one wanted to run for mayor, senator, or governor, etc., that was great. But to run for president was to follow in Washington's example, who did not shake hands and kiss babies, as he said, in order to win the presidency. By merely answering his country's call outwardly, they were not to appear publicly as actively seeking the office of presidency, even though there were people working in secret to secure your nomination. Until Bryan broke with Washington, the only other person to do so was Stephen Douglas in the year 1860, who gave a number of speeches around the country, but all were under the guise of visiting his mother. Bryan did not visit his mother. He was actively campaigning and asking people for votes, wanting to deliver 30 speeches in a 24-hour span of time, a total of 3,000 speeches in this 1896 campaign. He was renowned for his personality and communication skills and the substance of his beliefs. He was a progressive reformer and a pivotal figure in transforming the Democratic Party from a conservative party into a more liberal one, particularly on using federal power to aid small farmers and wage earners, and secondly, to strictly regulate large corporations. Sixthly, by 1900, the Republican Party emerged as the major party, a position that it would hold with few exceptions from the year 1895 to 1931. Coming to power in the midst of a depression, the Panic of 1893, and lost its power in the midst of a depression, the Great Depression, in the 1930s. Key for Republicans in this part of the turn of the century was economic revival. The country had recovered by 1897 to 1898, leading into 1900. The country had recovered from the panic of the 1893 Depression, which was the largest that had been known up until that time. Seventh point, voter turnout began to decrease. 79% of eligible voters participated in the year 1896. And so voter turnout began to decrease into a steady decline in voter turnout in presidential elections. There's only 73% of eligible voters participated in 1900. In 1904 is 65%. And then, of course, up and down over the next four elections. Again, we have Theodore Roosevelt, his second term, Taft for one term, and Woodrow Wilson for 2 terms. Also, Teddy Roosevelt and Taft was the first presidential debate, and it was recorded on radio. And so, in 1920, it went down to 49% of participating voters, and in 1924, it went down to a whopping 28.9%. Then it was up and down for a while over another 70 years, again, 12 presidencies, and in 1996, it was back up to 49% like it was in 1920. So, that was lecture number 1, very short lecture on American politics at the dawn of the 20th century. And so, right now, we basically have just covered some of the historical context leading up to the 20th century. Thank you.